one was 48. I'm gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order.
He's on it. So
I meant to just, it's not. I'm gonna go ahead and just call this the special meeting to order, and we need to take roll call, John?
Yes. Basico. Dimovid.
Here.
Heckman. Here. Slaughter. Here. Stimson. Here. Stuckey. Here. And Willie.
Here. I'm going to go ahead. We're going to open the communication to the citizens. We ask that you would speak within the 5 minutes. We have a lot on the agenda tonight, so we do ask that we keep it within that time frame. And John, if you want to set the timer, and anybody wants to take the podium, maybe start on the left. Right. Yep.
I just wanted to say thanks for your efforts, because I know this is not easy. And I almost feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I just feel like my voice needs to be heard. Case in point, new folks came into the condo or townhome next to me, and this just happened, so it's fresh in my memory. But the kids were running all over my yard. I love the laughter. I thought it was great. It's so fun to see that families are having a good time. My concern was a liability issue if they got hurt on my property. And it was a neighbor who actually called me to identify what was going on. And she was willing to call the management company to let them know what was happening. And I appreciate that. And I just don't want to see anybody get hurt. I have a ladder that's sort of like a decorative ladder, and I was afraid they were going to climb, afraid they'd climb that. I have a swing that's kind of a decorative swing, and I was also afraid that they might want to jump on that. So, and I have a mound there with a lot of rock, and my concern was actually for their safety. So, case in point, it's just an issue with trying to get individuals who short-term rent to get a better understanding of their responsibilities as renters. And I don't know how you do that when you get a revolving door. There's people coming and going and coming and going. And I think it's similar to how you manage the traffic on Highway 9 when there are so many new folks that are driving on that highway and don't necessarily want to follow the rules or don't care about the rules. But it's frustrating for me because I've had some really difficult times. I just hope that this board not only does what is right, but does the right thing for the residents of this community. And I do thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, my name's Beth Sobey. I live at 985 Western Fence Circle, and I'm the person that called Great Western Lodging on behalf of Cindy. For this very same reasons. Now, the little twist for us is that we do have a short-term rental license. We only rent during the winter, during the ski season. And I think that the members of our community know that we are extremely approachable homeowners, and we do not go through a property manager. We are self-managed. And we have encouraged on numerous occasions, and people can verify this, that we want to know if our tenants are not being respectful, if they're not following the rules, they're not following our rules, because we have some pretty strict rules as well. We also charge what we would consider a reasonable fee for our rentals. I believe there are some properties that are not charging reasonable fees, but pretty much encouraging people to come, and they're giving their properties away in an effort to generate some steam for their longer term, short-term rental business. We are homeowners. We are here 5 months out of the year, split it up. The other half of the year, we're on Hilton Head Island in South Carolina, where we also rent that property, short-term rental, summer only. So I guess what I want to say is I understand the frustration that a lot of our homeowners are experiencing. I, as a homeowner, am experiencing it as well. I would not tolerate it as a short-term property rental. I wouldn't tolerate it. I wouldn't rent to them again. It wouldn't happen again. And so I think there needs to be a balance that we find within the community. I think there also needs to be some protocol that's set up, because when I called Great Western Lodging and spoke with somebody at the front desk by the name of Kimberly, she was unaware that any of this was going on next door to Cindy's property. And after speaking with Cindy directly, she's called Great Western Lodging. So unfortunately, Cindy did have to get the town involved, police department. And I'm just wondering, this is a question I'm going to throw out there, is when there's a police report, is there a protocol that the police not only let the owners know, or do they let the owner and the property manager know? I'm just curious if that's just something, and I'm throwing that question out there. Because I, as an owner, would want to know if somebody was peeing off my driveway. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm Eric Vadla. We live in the neighborhood here. We also are short-term renters. We've been renting for about 9 years. I'd say that from feedback from our neighbors, we've only had a couple minor complaints, usually about leaving the lights on all night or late into the night. So I feel like that there you can have good short-term rental experiences. It's just how do we, attack the problems, and that's where I'd like to, see some actions if we can come up with agreement on what could be done. And I don't know what the answer is to that. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then I'll go ahead and close the public comment, and we can start on our agenda. I did want to mention, it was brought up at the last meeting that I had a conflict. I just wanted to bring, I in fact don't have a conflict. I rent timeshare, interval weeks, at resorts in Breckenridge. All ski and ski out, have amenities, swimming pools, restaurants. So it's not a conflict. I'm in Breckenridge. I just read 1 week time frames. So just wanted to make that, say that out loud. And then we can start on the agenda. We'll start with a brief description of policy number 1.
Thank you. I want to take a moment to talk about our last session and its values. It seemed like we went down a lot of rabbit holes. We talked about a great deal of issues, but the value of that session was the fact that you all had a chance to voice your major concerns about STRs. Really, what we wanted to happen was to start fleshing out your views and what issues might be important to you. So that was the real positive. But it also caused me to think a little bit about our STR ordinance that we currently have on the books and have had on the books for many years. And to talk a little bit about the original intent underlying that ordinance and why I think the current ordinance creates some of the problems that you talked about. The current ordinance was drafted back in a day in which we anticipated that STRs would largely be owners who stayed there for a significant period of the year and rented their space out. They were on vacation, maybe during the season. They were gone, snowbirds kind of situation. And it was not anticipated that we would have the kind of conversion to STRs that we're experiencing today. 365 24/7s, the corporate ownership, operation for profit, those were not really on the radar screen back then when we drafted the ordinance. So the ordinance really wasn't drafted to address that. We didn't anticipate that. It also didn't anticipate that there would be frequency associated with STRs. We thought most people would rent for 3, 4, 5 days, but it wouldn't be quick turnarounds. But everything kind of changed over the years, and we did change our ordinance suddenly. What changed was we started seeing a great deal more impacts caused by the conversion of the use of activity to short-term rental. And as those impacts came aboard, the prior boards of trustees addressed the impacts by changing the regulations dealing with impacts. And so they added more and more regulations to try to curb the complaints that we were hearing with regard to the use of STRs. But they never did sit there and talk about, is the direction in which STRs are going something we want to continue to see? That policy issue that we talked about last time, and hopefully we continue to talk about tonight. So there is what I would call a not completely adequate STR ordinance. It does probably need to be tweaked if you want to change policy from what the current STR ordinance says. Current STR ordinance says we will accept an unlimited number of STRs. We will accept an unlimited number of days of the year in which those will be rented, and that's what the policy is. That's what our current ordinance says. We talked a great deal about enforcement, and enforcement is a means of curbing the impacts. And so we set up these regulations to curb impacts. We didn't enforce as completely as we should have and have not. And so we are seeing more and more, still seeing complaints about STRs. But enforcement alone of the current regulations is not going to solve the problem that we're hearing about, which is these larger operations that operate frequently. That has to be a policy that you decide and regulations addressing that policy. So tonight what I prepared was an ordinance or an agenda that tries to walk through some of the major issues that I heard you express at the first session. And most of you talked about, and at a great deal of length, talked about the idea of caps. I'm not advocating caps or against caps or for caps. I'm advocating for you to decide what you want to do with regard to the number and the proliferation or potential proliferation of STRs in the community caused by something that didn't exist when we did the STR ordinance, which was other communities limiting by caps the number of STR opportunities. So if they went somewhere else, they're going to places where there aren't pressure. Yes. So we need to probably kick around the degree of caps with regard to the agenda. And if we don't go in that direction, great. If we do, there's some issues that I want to talk about. We talked a lot about the issues last time, so I'll leave that to you to see if you want to take that any further. Also, at the beginning of the agenda, I think it would be important for you all to voice your opinion on whether or not, and I know what you said on this, but whether or not you foresee that the town will obliterate or stop the program. You have the right to do it. Any given year, any given January 1, you can say we're no longer going to issue permits. No one can STR community. You have the legal right to do that. I think it's important for you to tell the public how you feel about that opportunity that you have, that power that you have, if you're going to exercise it or not. Because I think there might be some fear, latent fear out there by the public that that's where we're going. I'll leave it to you to talk about that issue. The other thing I heard a great deal about were the idea of setting a maximum number of days. It really wasn't in the context of we need to limit the number of days. It was in the context that I think uniformly on the board, you all said you did not want to see 24/7, 365 operations. These commercial operations that come in, buy the house, redo it, and then rent it out as a business opportunity completely. And no intent to stay there or as an owner. I heard that by several of you during the last meeting. So perhaps it might be a ripe issue for you to talk about. Do you want to address that more fully through a policy which gets implemented through the regulations, or perhaps considering a maximum number of days, it's the most common way to address the issue, a maximum number of days of rental for a year. Okay. We already have a minimum number of days, and that was imposed by a previous board to address the issue of hoarding licenses. People would just grab a license and not use it. Because at the time we put that in place, there was a concern that we might be capping. And if we cap and let people hoard, then we're not going to get sales tax from that kind of operation. And people will just sit on them and deprive others of the opportunity to have that use. And they have no intention of using it. Other people we deprive because they hoarded the license. So we set up a requirement for you people to limit or to put in a minimum number of nights in which they rent in order to keep the license from year to year. So that's also on the agenda. And then the issue that we heard a little bit about was the fast revolving door. I've heard about it tonight. The issue that the next door STR continues to move through people on a very short period of time. And so the impacts are kind of exacerbated in the fact that the people who stay there don't know the rules, they break the rules, and next ones come in very quickly after that, and they do the same thing, do the same thing, do the same thing. But perhaps another opportunity to address that kind of frequency of rental is the regulations that would, there's a lot of solutions on that. There are regulations in which require a minimum number of days of rental. It's commonly used by communities who do STRs, but there are other techniques to try to address that. Another issue, policy issue that we talked about. Those are the three major policy issues that Chad and I put on this agenda, but we also left up an opportunity for you to say, we're not going to talk about it, or we have other issues we want to talk about along with those, which you could open up at the end or at the beginning or anytime you want to, talk about specific issues you have, or if there's issues you want to postpone and put on another future agenda. In closing, I also want to talk about the issue of enforcement. Enforcement is probably the key, most critical thing you could do in any regulatory program, whether it be burns or STRs or anything else. If you don't enforce the regulations, people will run amok. They'll do things that you never intended for them to do. So enforcement is critical. Yes, it costs time. Yes, it costs money. Yes, it can be difficult at times. But I want to ask the board to think seriously about not bringing up enforcement at this period of time. Here's why. Oftentimes it comes in policy discussions that people say, I think we should do this. And somebody says, well, that's impossible to enforce. And the answer is, okay, we won't do it. The bottom line is nothing's impossible to enforce. So it's better to get the policy out and talk about what you want to see, and then we'll address the issue of enforcement. If it is in fact true that we can't enforce the policy that you want to impose, we'll tell you. But you need to set up your thoughts and beliefs and wisdom and views of what STRs mean to this community and how they should sit in this community. And that's important, more important right now than talking about enforcement. I'll stop there.
Okay. I'll move on to a short statement on some relevant data and information I included in the agenda packet, just to guide the source of this discussion. I have included a table, and I believe it should be page 3 or 4, which shows but several different columns: the total built in a subdivision, the total vacant, the total number of licensed STR operations within town limits. Which this table does not show known non-compliant short-term rentals, because it's a bit outside the scope of this conversation and the intended statistics. This also breaks down short-term rental percentage of all lots in a given subdivision and as a percentage of built lots. It is also something I'd like to note that the town has quite a few parcels of land, especially what we consider meets and bounds of former mining claims that are not easily accessible or viable for building operations. So that's why I wanted to make sure we note all lots and built lots in this to break it out and show where the percentages lie. The number of the percentage of all lots that are shown highlighted in orange are meets or exceeds the percentage of the average number of short-term rentals within the town as a whole. So if the neighborhood has a higher percentage or meets the percentage that exists as a town-wide conceptual object, then it is highlighted. You will notice that there's a couple more that meet that criteria if you just filter it to the built lots in a given neighborhood, or built lots as a criteria of the entire town-wide lot supply. These statistics are also broken out into 2 subsequent charts for ease of use. The first one being the number of short-term rental licenses that are issued and that currently exist within the town records. Once again, not unlicensed operations. So this gives a bit of a breakout of individual ones based on neighborhood. And this particular one as well, the STR as a percentage of built lots on the page following that, shows each of the lots in a percentage chart format, and there's a line that shows if it has met or exceeded the average percent of built lots in the community. So if one hits or exceeds that line, then it is higher than the average given throughout the town limits. It is also important to note the town has quite a few neighborhoods that have a vast difference in the number of lots and homes within each given neighborhood. So the statistics are a bit finicky because there are some that only have two neighborhoods, two lots, and some that have over 50. So it is something worth considering when evaluating the data. And lastly, I've also broken out within Summit County. These are all the different operational standards that are employed by the different communities. So it'd be Blue River, Breckenridge, Dillon, Frisco, Keystone, Montezuma, Silverthorne, and Summit County. Each one of them has their own quirks or different ways of handling things, so there is not a consistency in how it's adopted or implemented. However, there are useful parallels within the data to ascribe to this conversation. So with that, I'll let it move along.
And if I could follow up on a comment he made, is that we're not concerned about unlicensed STRs, and that's absolutely true. And in the equation discussion also, because we anticipate during the moratorium, as we get closer towards the end of it, we'll be able to do the research to find them. And when we find them, they receive a penalty and a 3-year ban on being able to get a license. So it's a significant penalty to operate an unlicensed one, and they're pretty easy to find because they're advertising, they don't have a license with a town. So they don't list a license on their website. So when we find them, they're going to get a 3-year ban, so they're not going to be in our equation. And they can't get a license now because of the moratorium in place, so they can't come in and clean up. So they're at a huge risk right now.
All right, so I think we have a lot to discuss, and there could be a possibility that we kind of get off track. So if I interrupt you, it's not because I don't think it's important. I just think we can put it on another work session. At least we'll try to go through most of the stuff tonight, and then if we have time, more things. That's it, everyone. But we'll start the confirmation of prohibiting STRs, and I just wanted to get everyone's kind of opinion on that, so that we can hopefully make people feel comfortable who currently have a license. So if you are for having STRs and don't want to prohibit and have 0 in the town, then that's what we need to discuss in this section.
Like to just differentiate between a short-term rental, which is anything less than 30 days, and somebody who might rent their property 30 days or more at a time. And I think sometimes that can be confused with a short-term rental versus anything over 30 days, which doesn't require a license. And it may be somebody that still rents the house a lot, but it's not as much of an impact to people coming and going. As a general statement, I'm in favor of talking about all this. But the general statement is I'm concerned about people operating their short-term rentals as a business rather than a true second home, which so long as I've lived here, that's always the spirit of that I've come to be used to. The spirit of a short-term rental, or the purpose of a second home, was for the family who owns its enjoyment was the first priority. And that the secondary short-term rentals were there to help offset costs that they might have on the house. It wasn't looked at as a profit center. And I think we took a big stride towards trying to say, because I think everybody's in favor of eliminating these property owners that want to operate it as a business. And I know that there's some people will use the term business or commercial operation to be the same, but they'll put everybody in the same box if you're short-term renting. But I look at it as a business as somebody that's looking at it as a profit center. And I think that I personally want to avoid that from happening. I want to stick with the true spirit of what I believe short-term rental and second home ownership is in this community. Thank you.
So to kind of address the topic at hand, you are not in, well, you do not want to prohibit STRs.
No, just to make clear how I felt we really wanted to talk about enforcement. I know that's another meeting, but because the majority of people on the board, trustees want to talk about the capping, I'm more than willing to talk about capping. Yeah.
Is there anyone in here on the board that would want to 100% have no more STRs going forward?
No.
Okay, so we could be comfortable in saying at this point, people who have STRs, possibly everyone would be able to renew their license who currently has a current STR. Or if you don't, just say that too.
I think it depends on how we can go further into this when we start looking at density of STRs and some other things in there. So I don't know that I could say that everybody who has one would be eligible for another one, depending on how we look at that variation or a cap or what we're doing. I'll be the first to say I'm not in favor necessarily of a cap. I've discussed it publicly in these meetings. I've discussed it with our constituents. I don't like different rules for different applications. I'm not a fan of this property is more valuable because it has a license. This property is less valuable because it doesn't. So that's one of my biggest struggles in everything that we talk about. So I would say I don't foresee a point where we would ban an SDR, but I can see that alignment for me working out that either everybody has this right or nobody has this right. I do fall into that. So that might go back to your first question a little bit, but I'm not in favor necessarily of banning this.
I'd just like to add on to what Ben said. I do want to discuss caps. In an ideal world, I'd love to see everybody have the opportunity to do an SDR and see a limit on the number of bookings per year. So everybody to go back to trying to limit it from becoming a business, and give everybody that opportunity, but also by in an ideal situation, if you limit the number of bookings, not the number of rental nights. So if you want to do, let's just use an arbitrary number, 25 bookings a year. You can book it for however long you want. You can do a 5-night booking, a 7-book, a 3-night booking, but every booking is a booking. And then that goes kind of along the lines of what Ben is saying. I'd like to see that be part of the conversation.
All right. So I think if we just get into the caps, right, and we start on this, then we can talk about maximum and minimums. My worry with max and minimums is that if you have different sites, right, I don't know how the software captures that, but if you have a direct booking site and you have VRBO and Airbnb and one of the other hundreds that are out there, how does it capture that you booked more than 25 nights? I don't know if the software would have that kind of intelligence to do that across the different. So that is my worry with kind of trying to say you can only have, we can say 10 nights, but it's based, how we collect that. I don't know how that software would collect that information. It might be difficult. I mean, we can definitely say we have a max or a minimum, but I don't know how realistic software is for that.
Well, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, Jody. It comes down to enforcement. And I thought we were going to, this has just been an ideal, open conversation about what I ideally would like to see. Like Ben saying, kind of all or nothing. Not if you didn't do caps, what other opportunities would be there to help minimize the impacts of people who are kind of the bad actors in the short-term rental situation? There are communities that are trying it, doing it. I don't know how successful it is, but I don't necessarily disagree with you. How do you track it? How do you make sure people are sticking to that? I don't know. It's just that's part of the conversation. So, but I don't disagree.
Anything on caps or, do we,
Well, I did have concerns with some of it, but, I'm not quite sure where to set a cap or a limit or something, but obviously we're having issues arise at the level we're at currently. So that makes it seem like we need to do something to, within the kind of what's out there already. And allow it to reach a point where we can have a better handle on it as a town and allow that to work for everyone in the town, what their option is to rent, or to live here full time, or to have a second home that they don't rent out. Like that. That's kind of where I see it.
Then why would one house be worth more if it has license when that license is non-transferable? I'm a little hazy there.
Well, so one house had the ability to obtain a license and one didn't.
Because of a cap.
Let's just say 50% in the subdivision.
Because if you have a cap, that means anybody can technically get a license with a cap.
Right.
Restricted to get it based on that.
So I think that's picking that winners and losers thing really hard.
No, I don't disagree.
And maybe it's possible that a license has a lifespan, right? That many people have gotten licenses year after year after year after year. Maybe we say that a license only has a certain lifespan, right? And then it has to go back into that pool, right? So whatever that number might be, I have no idea. But to give that opportunity, so getting back to this, so everybody has a right to that at some point. And granted, it might not be at the same time, but everybody has the option to do that with their property, right? So you didn't have, we have a couple of subdivisions, Timber Creek being the one that is obviously the highest in short-term rentals. They're at that 50% range. So if their cap stopped today, and they have 50%, if they kept those licenses, then 50% of those houses never have the opportunity to realize that short-term benefit, if that's something they were interested in, right? It's stuck. So I worry about that a little bit too. I like what Bar said, and the first time you brought it up with Summit County, right? That having a certain number of nights, or a certain number of bookings, whatever that might be, right? Whether that's number of bookings in a year or number of days that you're actually allowed to rent during a year. However, I think I would kind of lean into that a little bit more, just because everybody has the option to do that. As you both said, I would worry a lot about the enforcement on that particular one. And I worry not just from Blue River's enforcement, but I worry, and it's something that you said before, I think, there are these companies out there now who will long-term rent a house for 6 months or for
3 years.
2 years, right? And then they turn it into this other pool that their members are allowed to use this house. So they circumvent everything we do or we try to do as a town. And they say, yeah, we have 750 members. And this is how we're going to use this property. But they went around us and turned it into a short-term rental that just has a very different look, right? It has no tax benefit because it's a long-term rental, right? They've gone around. And that's what I worry about that when we say, all right, we're going to have 10 bookings, 20 bookings, whatever that number is, right? That's usually arbitrary. But the ability to get around that concerns me. And not so much from individual owners trying to get around that, but just the whole kind of situation that we've seen, right? I said it last time in the meeting. I mean, these companies are billion-dollar companies that are renting houses in neighborhoods all over the U.S. So that concerns me a little.
And I'll just voice on that. Our current regulations do not allow a long-term renter to create short-term rentals. Our current regulations say that. So if we knew that they were doing a long-term rental and then creating a short-term rental opportunity,
Even if they didn't charge them,
there's a way to get to that.
there is a way to find
Yeah,
it. Okay.
because they're not members without cost, right? They pay a subscription fee, and the ordinance would also address that kind of arrangement. So if they do a subscription fee to allow use, it would also qualify as a short. Okay, so we can get to that. I don't want to talk enforcement, but there are ways to enforce.
That's just one of the things that always worried me. There's always, no offense, Bob, but there's always a lawyer out there trying to figure out how to get
I'm so often.
Sad is trying to log it up, but
Glad you brought that up.
I think, for me, caps, control kind of this 48% or whatever it is that Timber Creek has. Because if you don't do kind of like, in my opinion, a town like a zone or a neighborhood cap, zone A could have 100%, and then zone B has 50%. Like you just, and I don't think that's winning for the residents of that particular area. So a cap would, you know, if you grandfathered everyone in today and it's at 47%, in time, that would get low or at where our cap is at in my, but you are creating winners and losers, but I think we need to protect our residential character, what this town can actually handle, between our water, septic systems, the police force, our staff. There's a limit, and if it was 100%, you know, most people wouldn't want to live here anymore.
and I agree, Judy. I think short-term rentals breed short-term rentals. Right, I think when there's one or two, a third, a fourth, I think they start to pop up in the neighborhood, changes pretty dramatically. I also think there's some inherent differences in properties in Blue River, and I've struggled with this one a ton. I mean, John's property, very unique, right? I think there's a ton of properties on the east side of Highway 9. If their properties don't interact with a town road, right? They come off of Highway 9 straight into a driveway. Most of those properties are set back. There's national forest behind them. So, you know, I mean, I think there's some really unique characteristics. Like, to say one thing, you know, I'm on Mountain View, so there's a road, and lots of people use that road, whether you say it's the hot tub guys using it, the cleaners are using it. You know, all the extra use that road is getting, John can come in or anybody else on Highway 9 and say, I don't have a town. Right? They turn up Highway 9, they're at my house. They can do whatever they do. So their impact on the town to me is different. And I struggle, it's hard, right? Because when you start saying this property is different than this property, yeah, I think it can be a mess pretty quick.
So what I'm hearing the two of you say, which is important, is that if the STR rents out at a certain level or less, that's not a problem. Okay, what I'm hearing you say. Okay? And if everybody had that opportunity and rented at that level, it'd be okay, depending on what the level is. But understand the level can be changed. We have the authority to say that if the community's 30, if the subdivision, let's say, is 30% STR, and you say the number of bookings has to be X, and if 30% do X, great, no problem. Walks and talks, fine, and fits into our community. But as that number goes up, 30% goes to 40 goes to 50, you have the authority to say now your limit of the number of nights of bookings or whatever you have to live actually gets smaller because the impact gets greater. But that's down the road. That's down the road. So you wouldn't need caps if you have the right number compared to the right percentage of homes within the community.
So we need to figure out what we think the impact is and try to base it off of that impact.
If you say to me that if somebody rents out 200 days a year out of 365, that's too many of it, too much of it. But 100 is okay. I mean, there's a number in there. It may not be scientific, but we don't have to be scientific in government. Sorry. But there is a perception that a certain number is too much and a certain number is okay. And maybe that number needs to be found in all not to count.
On the cap conversation, I was thinking originally that if that's the road we go down, that we do it on a percentage per subdivision. And then I got to looking at the unique design of our community, and we're not just a rectangular square community where you can do something like that. Some of these communities are larger, like Blue River Estates. I call it Blue River Estates, even though it's a bunch of different little subdivisions. And it's not necessarily, a percentage doesn't necessarily work. You take Timber Creek Estates. And I think a lot of times people will go into Timber Creek Estates because it's newer homes. They're more appealing a lot of times to short-term rental. You take Lakeshore and the Crown, and looking at chat statistics, why did they have a pretty high amount for the number of homes? I think it's because they're closer to Breckenridge. And there's appeal, like you probably less of an impact up on Hoosier Pass, and as you get closer to Breckenridge, it certainly works that way with real estate values. So why not with short-term rentals too? And then I started thinking, well, maybe somehow doing zones is more realistic if we're going to do something like that. Because, and like Ben was saying, on the highway, you've got some of these lots that are long and large, and they don't have as much of an impact on like these little half-acre lots in a subdivision like mine, Jody's, and most of ours. So, two different conversations. I certainly limiting the number of licenses is easier to track than the other possibility of limiting the number of bookings or nights or whatever.
I wish I had better comment to provide on the usefulness of software, one way or the other, in that particular atmosphere. But objectively, yes. But there are multiple routes here.
I'll go back, and I don't see it so much as picking a winner or a loser. I see it as picking our residential town and neighborhoods versus the commercial impact that's being brought in by these lodging businesses operating. So that's kind of how I look at it. Not winners or losers, but our residents, our residential.
Well, I like to use myself as an example of people be concerned about the effect on the community and the neighborhood. And based on the statistics, it looks like my neighborhood is one of the higher percentages.
I do.
And yet I know Nick has a problem. Nick, the mayor, Jody, and I live in the Crown. And I know Nick has a problem, short-term rental in front of his house. So a lot of what you observe is your perception is what's happening around you. I've got short-term rentals around me, but I don't really feel the impact or a negative impact from these. And I still feel like in a part of a neighborhood, Jody's my neighbor and my friend. I feel like I have a connection with the people. So sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time with that comment, but then I can certainly understand if you're surrounded in the worst case scenario by 4 short-term rentals, your perception is going to be we are being overrun and life is not good. Like the building, or you have that bad actor, and that's really what I'm trying to attack or address. It's the bad actors I think that are making this really undesirable for the community and because I think in general a lot of people try to do the right thing that own these homes, and they're trying to be good neighbors. But anyway.
And just like Bob said, I think that was more true years ago. Right? I think it's evolved from where this started to where it is today. I don't think that's it.
And I'm just saying from my perspective, I don't see it. And even though I've got one of the higher percentages in my neighborhood, I haven't seen this big change from when we built our house in 2000, 26 years later. I haven't seen this, but I had more problems with long-term rentals. And I know we're not in that conversation, but it's just a perception thing too. And I'm not saying I don't want to address it. It's just, I can use myself as an example as far as a subdivision that has a lot of people in it, short-term rented or percentage-wise.
Sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead, John.
If you look at certain neighborhoods, you will definitely see a pattern of specific concentrations of 2 or 3. It may be random. It may be the influence of having one domino affecting the neighboring properties. But you are absolutely correct. It's a matter of perception. It's always tricky on those because they tend to cluster. And it doesn't really have much distinction neighborhood to neighborhood. They all seem to share that pattern.
When we regulate in government, we're always aware of the fact that there are super sensitive people who are impacted to a greater degree, whatever we're doing. And there are people who are less sensitive, far less sensitive. We try to regulate to what's called the reasonable person standard. So what will the reasonable person find objectionable about the particular thing that we're trying to fix? We don't knee-jerk reaction to a super sensitive person because that's not the best way to regulate. Same holds true with people who don't really care. It's that personal limit.
As a side note, does Spruce Valley Ranch not allow short-term rentals?
No,
Okay, so I noticed. That's another interesting dynamic. It seems like sometimes the more expensive you get with your homes, like you take the Highlands, for example, they're in Zone 3 in Breckenridge as an example. You're not going to get a license in that community for at least 10 years. You're on the waiting list. So there seems to be this, from my observation, right or wrong, sometimes when the homes get more expensive, the less people think about short-term rentals.
And I'll ask the real estate agent, is that because people who are at that higher end of ownership are really looking to make money off the operation?
They don't, it's not that, I hate to say that people have to make money or they can't afford it. It's not that, it's a justification for the purchase. They can afford these places. It's just they want to do it and make it, if they can pay their electric bill, their property taxes, some maintenance. If you do it as in the true spirit of what second home ownership has always been to me, and you have a mortgage, you're going to be upside down. It's not a good business decision. It's an investment in your family. Even if you have no loan, you'll be lucky to make 1%. Lucky 1% appreciation on the amount of money you invest if you pay cash. They don't make good sense that way. But there are people out there that do this as a business, and it does make sense for those people. And that's one of the big issues I think that we've seen come up. Certainly that was one of the issues we saw when we implemented, if you have multiple properties, you don't get one license. And that's the reason we did that. At least that's the reason I voted for it.
My quick note on your comment of why people do it and don't do it. I have a small property management business. I look after 5 homes. 2 of them have attempted to rent in the last 15 years since I've been there. And they just stopped doing it because it's wear and tear on your house and it's hassle. They don't deal with it. They deal with it at work every day. They don't want to deal with anything. That is my opinion.
Disagree.
And that's also why I don't deal with short-term for business. It's a problem.
Yeah, and when you pay that much for a house, you really don't want people coming and scratching at the walls, I guess. That's my perception.
And I know this is a policy conversation, but I'm kind of worried that I still think no matter what we say on every topic we're talking about, it 90% to 95% comes back to enforcement. And half of the enforcement problem is citizens needing to formally complain and maybe not being willing to or want to. So maybe making that more official or effective and easier would help. But as far as the caps, I mean, I see it and I see some of the density concerns of them all being clustered together. But if you look at the numbers based on the total lots, which is our total potential, numbers guy, and none of them are that awful. I think it's just back to what I keep going to is that there's probably 8 rentals in that town that need to go away. And I bet we would have one person here complaining instead of 10 or 15 every time. And I would like to, I mean, it sounds like a witch hunt almost to me, but I would be more than happy to help those people get rid of those rentals if they're going to be a problem, to not cause problems from a small minority, which the government seems to do on all levels, rules the focus of everyone's policy and everyone's concern when it's just a 2% of the whole population or the issue. And I don't like to see that because, you know, I rent my house a lot. I'm not going to say I don't. And I'm a very unique situation. Like Ben said, I'm there. They don't need to worry about the town coming. If I go up there, that's their problem. I'll turn the door code and they can leave. I don't care one bit.
Like more of you.
I can definitely say there's like better property managers. Even on our road, you know which one's managed by which property. You know, you can kind of just tell by who's staying or how many people. I just think if we don't put a cap on, then we're saying that it's okay to be 100% STR at some point. This is a, we're getting to the point and where before, I think our percentage and what I remember from meetings before I was even on the board was 28% will start talking about it. And we were at 28% before we changed kind of how licenses were made, and I don't know what happened, but now we're less than that. But, you know, I think it's an opportunity to change policy, to implement caps based on keeping just the character of the town. We don't have a residential core. We don't have businesses to run. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense that you would just allow an unlimited number of STRs in your neighborhoods. You want to go out your front door and talk to your neighbors. And I think somebody wrote in and they said it's just a revolving door. They used to be able to go outside and they would see their neighbor and they'd be able to chat with them. And now it's a different person every couple of days. And it changes how and why we probably moved, and a lot of the constituents moved to Blue River, was to have more of a neighborhood feel, not a resort community.
Well, going back to the Highlands, I love the fact that most of those homes were vacant most of the time around them. They didn't like it, they just liked them vacant all the time. And it was really nice to have that. And if anybody came over, it bothered them. So there's like two sides of that equation.
Sounds to me, Barry, like they're not rich enough to live in a lot big enough to see people. They should make some more money.
The people I've talked about?
Yeah.
Well, no, they have plenty of money. Just the other side of that is
You buy the houses next door.
we live in a second. We live predominantly. We live in a. I don't know how many percent the percentage of full time ownership or versus second homes, but we live in a second home predominantly, I think. And I'd be willing to bet that Blue River is probably predominantly second homes. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who wouldn't mind having all the homes vacant, except that family that, you know, when the family comes out 2 or 3 times a year. But
And I agree with you, Barry, on that one. I do think there's a certain part of it. If you've been here long enough, you've seen enough change, right, to where half of the homes were vacant on a pretty regular basis, right? And that's just changed. And whether they're STRs or people living in them or whatever they are, that's just part of the evolution that we've gone through. To go back to something Johnny said, I understand that homeowners, right, they have this tool and they have a phone number they can call and they can go through this process. But to me, at the end of the day, whether it's the end of a long work day or whatever day you may have up here, to show up at your house and you can pick up the phone and call and say, all right, I have this problem with my neighbor, I gotta go do this, and this is, I think that's a lot to ask. Day or at your retirement, right? You're going home more often. To constantly put this on people to say, yep, there's these rules in place and you have to call and you have to go through these steps and you have to do these things to live in a tranquil community that you like. I don't like putting that on people. I think it is some of our job to figure out how they can just go home at the end of the day, right? And just relax or, you know, whatever they were going to do that day. I have always struggled with that in every conversation we've had. I struggle with they need to do more, they need to call, they need to complain, they need to do that. Like they just want to go home.
And
They just want to go home. Yeah, they just want to go home.
And part of the reason I think we saw that is that we expect the owners to step up and defend themselves because we're not enforcing. We have enough cops on the street. You don't need the neighbors to point. It's cops to catch them. So if you're doing it right, you don't need people to step up. But I will tell you, as a person who's prosecuted cases for a long time, is that you can't prosecute anonymous complaints. And so you got to get somebody out there, like somebody who's a code officer, somebody who can testify that they saw it. And if the person's not willing to say they saw it, it's almost useless.
I know about pictures.
and
Pictures do help.
you know, I know that you want to make this a different conversation, the enforcement, so I'm trying not to go down that rabbit hole. But I think that this reporting of offenses, we need to have the police department involved because they get a lot of the calls. We need to have a system where they get a report, a call, and it goes into our system at town hall, so we know who the bad actors are. Because I don't think we have that meshing of information. And so when we go down this road of enforcement, I hope we do get a better system between the police department's calls that they get and our system to track who's being a good, responsible short-term rental or not. Because we keep hearing these stories about there's this house and they've got people that are about around them that are really being mad. You haven't gotten calls at town hall. You know, why not? I called the police, but we didn't hear about it at town hall. And I'm not faulting the police. I'm just saying we need a better system.
I mean,
Well,
my 15 years on the highway, until 2 years ago, it was a long-term rental next to me, and I called the cops 4 times on them in all those years, in like 12 years, 13 years, and the cops never came. So that was much more of a problem.
Well, I've called the owner several times of a short-term rental behind me. That didn't help at all. She's the same lady that I called her about a tree, and she said, well, we'll just let insurance handle it. So $100 cut down the tree at that time, or let the tree fall on my house. Anyway, that's not the issue here. And then I was told, calling her, and I constantly pick up the trash. She leaves cans in the middle of the woods. The bears come, knock it all over. And I was told that, in order to track, we have to call the non-emergency dispatch number. Well, I probably called that 10 times. Chief Close has been there, and every other officer, and still nothing is happening. Then I find out she doesn't even have a short-term rental. And if we want to go all the way back to, are we willing to end the short-term rental program? It's a conversation I'm not against having, but I'm also not advocating for that. But is that an option? Because I have lived here for a long time, most of my life, 60 years, and have been in this town, and short-term rentals were not a part of most of it. However, again, not advocating that we close down this program.
But you wouldn't be against it.
the thing is,
I'd certainly entertain the conversation, but I'm not pushing us that direction. Because I think that there are a lot of people who would be quite dismayed if the town did that.
It's not fair. It's like we're trying to find a
Well,
balance.
I'm a constitutional kind of guy. I served in the military for 21 years, and I don't want to be the guy that tells another man what he cannot or cannot do with his property. However, when your rights start spilling over and infringing on mine, I start having issues. And that's what's happening a lot.
I mean,
Well-
I'm sorry.
well, what I was saying is, you keep mentioning the bad actors or whatever. It's not always the home owner, it's those short-term tenants that are there for a day or 2 days, So where do you get the control on the bad actors? Are the people coming in, the quality of that short-term renter? And, because we can't do anything about that short-term rental until after the fact and not beforehand. So, then the homeowner can come and say that they're slow coming after the fact, if they're even the contact person for the property. It might be this Great Western Lodging or some other property manager or some other person that's not even related, that's a contact. So once again, it does come back to making sure that information is there. But do we have, I see the nature of violations, but I don't see specifically like if you cross the noise violations, or if you have this many traffic violations or anything like that in here. So how do we cumulatively track that as well to make it a bigger impact upon that short-term rental owner to take responsibility for that?
These are all definitely all individual points that we should tackle in step one after the other in a following meeting, because I think that a large chunk of this is we're also looking at and evaluating our policies in how the town is able to assess set penalties in a way that is appropriate and strikes the right balance between the amount of staff time that is required and the resulting, the offsetting what occurs at the end of that entire process. So that is something we are also in tandem working on. And I will say that there is a system that I do receive the code complaints. We are working on developing a system that works appropriately for the town's capacity and our ability to act on those code violations. So we will be tackling this one. Good, I promise. Yeah.
So going back to the cap, and that discussion, I thought about a community-wide cap. Let's just say we put a 50% cap on licenses in all inclusive in Blue River. Well, that to me didn't work, because then you've got some of these subdivisions that are taking the burden, the majority of these, or more share of these short-term rentals. And does it really solve the problem? Well, it sounds good to say we've got 50% cap, but there's still those subdivisions that are suffering because they've got overabundance of people, right? And then I thought about, okay, what about we go down the road of percentages per subdivision? Well, then I start looking at the odd shape of Blue River and how it's unique. And some of these communities, some subdivisions are grouped into an area more so than some of the other subdivisions. So then I started thinking about zones. I'm trying to get a fair number of zone and then saying, okay, then putting a percentage on it. Because I don't know how else to do caps unless you do percentages. But how do you delineate these areas and those, and then apply that fit? I'm using a number 50%. That's whatever. How do you say this area is fit? Which area is going to be? How do you delineate that? To me, after thinking, looking, it almost seems like you got to create some zones, because some of these areas are more highly densely populated versus going by the subdivisions. Ideally, I'd love to see, and I've talked about before, is like a maximum number of bookings. And I certainly appreciate how hard it would be to track that. I think if you take two things, if you take the element of running it as a business out and you have better enforcement, I think it's going to take care of a lot of our issues with bad neighbors. I mean, in our neighborhood, Jody, for example, if we did 50% on the neighborhood, would that really make it a better neighborhood, a more community-oriented neighborhood? I'm not sure it would. I mean, even if we did 20% as an example per neighborhood, I mean, that bad actors ruin it for everybody else. I don't know how it could, but one person could make the whole neighborhood a bad place to live.
If you have it at 50%, though, you're inviting more bad actors, possibly.
I'm just using that as a,
Sure.
whether it's 20, 30, 40. I mean, Chad, Jody, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I didn't quite understand your numbers.
Oh yeah, of course. I was actually about to touch on that, so it's a good segue. One of the biggest challenges with the number of bookings thing is definitely played out in these numbers, where if you look through it, I don't know of a community that uses that as the number one statistic in the enforcement mechanism of how it's operating. Some have caps per zone, some have percentages, and those interchange. Percentages and number of housing units, they do loosely equate to a percentage either way, even if you have a number of caps per housing units in an area. But there is a wide discrepancy on how individual communities deal with this problem. No community is the same as another one that is next to it, and that's one of the most cop-out answers I feel like I can give you guys right now. But for example, if you see Breckenridge Zone 3, I would characterize that as a residential primary descriptor, and that is active 10%. That is used in the same as Silverthorne uses the same criteria as purely residential is 10%. However, they also have other components of town, like a commercial core, that offset. Correct. So that's where something that is a wider scope, like Frisco, just decided 25% and let's be done with it, regardless of type of unit within town limits.
It's a townwide
Townwide,
25%.
correct,
They want to get 25% in the town of Frisco,
correct.
no more licenses, you're waitlist.
Yes, and as far as I'm aware, they have hit their cap. So they are on a filtering waitlist system. I don't have more detail on how long those licenses vest and what if do you have to relinquish them to allow someone else on the waiting list. But for example, there's a variety. Like Keystone has no limit.
Neither does Copper Mountain.
Exactly. Yes. But the condominium proliferation makes it a very different community than Blue River. These are useful tools. However, there is no one parallel that fits Blue River standards in the community, in the county as a whole. The primary residential character, single family, with no commercial core. So these 10% guidelines are useful to look at, but it needs to be considered in a wider context of having multiple zones, for example, in Breckenridge and Silverthorne, to allow for that 10%. So if anyone wants me to dig on any of these individuals, I'm happy to talk about it. So if there's one that catches your eye, please.
And what you see is communities that want to put heads in the beds because of the generation of the sales taxes will increase the numbers within the core because they don't care if there's STRs. They want as many people on the street, so to speak, and in the rooms to generate that life, right? The commercial life that they need to support. If they have a lot of vacant units in the core of the community where all the restaurants and stuff are, that's not a good thing. So you increase the number in those areas where you need to generate more population. As you move away into the distant areas, you're not as concerned about increasing the number of STRs. So you see these differences that we don't have here. We don't have industrial, we don't have commercial, we have all residential. So one thing you might want to think about is take a lesson from the election voters, in which you try to set up election zones that have the same number of people, and the same number of, in this case, would be STRs. So maybe our number each zone has to be relatively equal as to number of units, number of homes, and number of existing STRs. And then those zones would be fairly comparable. And as they grow proportionally. We use like a higher standard for STRs. So it can be done to set zones. But we need to be aware of the fact that we're not there's zones that's sensitive.
You don't think any zone would work?
No, I think it would. It'd have to be a different zone.
You're saying Breckenridge system is not.
Well, we only have
just
just one
one
zone, so we have to divide by
We're
something.
just all residential, but it's just hard to.
You're all residential, but you don't want to be unequal, right? So the zone equality comes from number of units and number of STRs.
Because that's the intent, is to reduce the impact per area around your house. Ideally, in an ideal world, everybody's gonna have
Everybody wants
equal
an
number of
STR,
short-term
everybody
rentals.
lives next door.
Everybody's gonna have an equal number of short-term rentals in their house. So
I'm like,
Here's is that I want to go to Ted's point, and this is just more of a thought experiment, and I haven't been here as long as Ted, but I've been here for a long time. What does the town of Blue River look like in 5, 10, 15 years if there is no short-term rentals? If it's just not part of what we do.
I get what you're saying, Ben.
It's what?
Depends if we get our sales tax from Breckenridge or not. That would offset a serious financial thing that we bring into the STRs.
Someone else brought that up at a different meeting at a different time. And their comment was, if you eliminate short-term rentals, you create an elitist community at that point.
Yeah.
Where nobody needs those rentals, nobody cares about those rentals. And people in the community, people living in, this was a conversation in Breckenridge, living in the affordable housing and stuff, didn't necessarily want to live in an elitist community either. they like it, they like some of the diversity. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Where you got-
It does, but I don't, it's just, so. I don't, I think that implies that the only people that are gonna live here are people who are wealthy enough to own their home.
Yes.
And I don't think that's true, and you said it before, and Johnny said it before, I've said it before in these meetings. We had a bigger problem here 20 years ago with long-term seasonal. Basically, we had winter renters that were a much bigger problem, like Johnny's old neighbor, right? The year-round renters were actually and I'm not saying a bigger problem, a different problem, right? So I don't think if you got rid of STRs, I don't think you turn your community into this elitist community. I think you turn some of the homes back into rentals, right? You're going to get people, working people, that come out here and live in some of these homes, right? You don't.
Are you saying long-term rent?
Long-term rentals, yep.
So that, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense, Ben. Why would someone buy a house, a second home, just to long-term rent it 365 days a year?
We have, I mean, we've had those.
But it's anything over 30 days, right? So
It's just
they
an
could rent it for 3 months.
Because there are people who like the summers up here and don't ski or snowboard. I mean,
So then
that's,
so then you've got a situation where people are renting 30 days at a time.
Well, I think you're
That's
looking
already-
more at seasonal rentals or possibly year-round rentals, and there are still people in the river who rent year-round, who live here and work in Bracker, Keystone, or wherever they work. I don't buy the argument that you turn into this elitist community that only certain people can live here. I don't.
Well, you just said there's a picture. What does the picture look like? And it was a comment that was made. It didn't resonate with me at the time, but I'm starting to see it in places like the Highlands and stuff like that, in Breckenridge, where pretty much nobody gets a short-term license, and they are wealthy people, and they are part of the community. I've got a lot of friends that are wealthy, but it does take away from a little bit of your community also when you're just so lopsided on one side. And I'm just bringing the point up because we're talking about community, right?
For sure.
And
No, I didn't mean to cut you off, Brian.
but I understand what you're saying. But you asked the question, what does it look like? I don't know what it looks like. It's just one comment that was made. It could happen that way.
And honestly, I never thought about it turning into a more elitist community, only because similar to Ted, I was here before short-term rental, right? And it wasn't then, and I know it's a very different, right? It's comparing apples to oranges, so I understand that. It was just, what is this community? To me, 20 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and maybe you're right. Maybe it turns into a very elite community, or maybe it's a community that's very focused on the things that we have here, right? The land, the water, the lifestyle, the lack of commercial business, right? Maybe we stay a very residential and neighborhood in Summit County, which I think is pretty rare now. I don't think we have a ton of residential, right? We're talking about getting rid of Breck L, right? Because there's no students, right? We're losing that family portion, right? It's going away. And that's not just here, right? That's Denver, there's a lot of communities around the country. So I was just, once Ted mentioned it, I think it was worth talking about. Like, I remember before, it was a pretty great place before. Like, it's a great place today. There's no shade on where we're at today. I was surprised in the last meeting when we asked Chad the financial gain of STRs. I thought it would be a much larger percentage of our budget than it is. But we seem to play a lot of this goes round and round for not that much benefit as far as the town. Right? I understand individual benefit, it can be pretty high. But as far as the town's benefit, the amount that it contributes to the budget, I would be with Ted. I would entertain any conversation. I'm not advocating for it, but I would absolutely entertain a conversation.
Another piece of that too is property taxes. If all of a sudden you take away disincentivize people from buying a second home, which I'm saying I think a lot of those homes out there are second homes, and they justify the purchase by being on short-term rent. What happens when we start getting in situations, if that, it's pretty extreme, but it can happen, where you say no short-term rentals.
I don't think property values decrease that substantially. I think property taxes are still enough to pay for the roads and, the major things that this board is responsible for providing to our
constituents and citizens.
I think it's fine, that's a direct conflict. Because on one hand, maybe it becomes an elitist community that no one can afford a vehicle.
25%. So,
Overall,
Yes, that is correct. It's 26% of built.
so
Lot.
75% of our community
but what
does
overall-
not utilize the short-term rental program. 75% doesn't short-term rent or use that. So I'm not sure
I
how.
will say that I can't quantify the number of unlicensed currently operating.
That's
That
a
is
whole
kind of the
different
missing
story.
gap that
Yeah.
I can't make that exact number.
But guess what?
Well,
They're not getting a
but that
license
is-
under the
But if
regulations.
we talk about
They're
a
doing
5-year
it
picture,
without.
it's how many of the total plots.
So, I don't know how that could dramatically impact the values when 75% seems to not be utilizing that program.
Hear what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense, like hearing that.
Careful, Joe.
I guess at the end of the
Makes sense.
but at the end of the day, if there was no tax revenue, would be in monasteries, right? Like if there was no benefit to 75%. I don't know.
We also need to focus as this program develops and as we get a better sense of where the town is headed, that will come in lockstep with being able to have better mechanism to one-to-one identify what the lodging tax should be as to what the self-reported lodging tax that people are providing is at this current moment. Sure. So that may also reflect a different budget, something I cannot appropriately budget for in the future years. So once again, another question mark, but it just depends on where, if there's a larger percentage of people who do not properly report their lodging tax, or if that number is less than I understand it to be.
And you're talking about people with a license.
Correct.
With a license, but not accurately reporting.
Correct.
I would
Yes,
imagine
agreed.
that number would change significantly, once the software was implemented. Because, just seeing communications, in Breckenridge, Airbnb collects your taxes. In Blue River, Airbnb doesn't collect any of the taxes. So if your statements say you didn't withhold any taxes, you didn't pay any taxes, right? Because Airbnb paid Breckenridge's and to their sales tax, and you know what I mean. Like, so it's a different. I think our number will change dramatically. Also, last year the number of STRs was not significantly, it was higher. This year it's lower. I think that might have to do with some new policies and things that we have. I do believe caps also make people compliant. If you have the fear of losing your license, you'll want to be a better neighbor because you don't want those complaints and the things to happen. And that's also just going down. We're going to have probably those discussions again, and like in another work session, but maximums and minimums. I mean, those things need to be discussed. I would say a week at my house, we don't flush the toilet as many times as a weekend at the house on Super. There's a difference in the strain that we're putting on a community.
Well, you and I disagree on that a little bit.
Sure.
In terms of, is it realistic to put a strain on your septic system, to consider the strain a second home puts on a septic system and a well versus the one that's primary residence? They're designed for that.
I mean, for the first time in 6 rentals, I actually had a family with 3 kids and 2 adults, 5 people, and my limit's 6 with 3 bedrooms. And every rental before that for 6 or 8 was 2 people. And so that's not a strain, but like that's where Bob's saying that we are not, as government, have to look at numbers and facts, but I'm a numbers and facts guy, and usage is usage, and I think we should study that either way to figure out, and we can change stuff. But on another perspective of financially, as someone said in a meeting last meeting or one before, like overall, financially right now, it would probably make more sense for me to long-term rent my house, but that would also increase my usage because long-term rentals are generally going to be younger people and don't seem to have any respect for the resource system or the power or the water or anything generally. And that would drastically increase all of my usage. And then also speaking on, then I also would not contribute the like $5,000 a year I pay my 3.4% tax to the town. So it would be a small financial thing. And if we're saying that we're going to gain 20% more in revenue by making people compliant, that's helpful. And I think some of the things we've been using this extra money for are good for the town, like trying to get trails and things that are actually helping offset the negatives of the short term. It's allowing our community to have extra trails and kind of hiding places for the locals, because that's how I describe it as. I always have to have a hiding place. I don't even tell my closest friends some of my spots I like to go. It is what it is. And then touching on community, I mean, community overall is part of the short-term rental allure, is getting some kid that comes here and then maybe moves here later and lives the dream when most of the world don't get to, and tries to be a ski bum or this or that. And it comes from people coming here. And if we go too far one way or the other and don't stay in the middle, it's going to limit that. And I think it's going to make more people maybe even resent some of the people who are wealthier in the elitist communities and this and that. We've already got a lot of that, and that's not necessarily healthy either. And I enjoy sharing some things with people, you know, and getting people who it's their first time seeing snow or this or that. I think that's a good part of our community too. And if you don't want to share, that's, you know, maybe a reflection on some characters that we don't need, but we need to manage the facts and I think base things on that and where we want to go. I agree with the 5-year thing, but it's going down generally.
I might just go back to
Financial.
let's find the balance. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, taking away all together. But let's try to find balance and how we I think today's conversation about caps primarily. How do we realistically do something like that? Can we discuss minimum number of nights or bookings? Can we discuss minimum number of people in a home? Used to be septic systems controlled that for us, but now that we're on the sewer system, you can put a lot of bedrooms into a house that maybe was only designed originally with 3 or 4.
It's a some. Not everybody's on site.
But the majority of the community has accessibility to the sewer main, so you could. And we're just gonna see more of it, and that's what I'm saying, is more, all I'm saying is septics used to control the use problem, because you could only do it by, number of bedrooms. So now we're put in a position of if you got a lot of people in the sewer system, not a septic, then you got to start saying, okay, you got a 3,000 square foot, this 2,500 square foot house that maybe was designed for 3 bedrooms, and somehow they get 4 or 5 bedrooms in there. Is it realistic for that, by square footage to have all those bedrooms? Or bunk beds in every room? I mean, do we start going down that? Because we're talking about impacts too, and that's one, you can start limiting the number of people in the homes, regardless of the septic system.
Or the number of bedrooms.
Or number of bedrooms. It's maybe by square footage, I guess.
Or maybe just a maximum. Everybody's treated equally. You get a high point max.
Right. Maybe
No
that's
matter how many bedrooms. You can do that.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily mind seeing that part of the equation. I think it needs to be brought up if we're going to try to find a balance here on how to allow this to continue and just find that balance between community and too much and too little.
I think you're onto something here. And as far as balance goes, and many of you talked about this, there are ways to bring in different kind of regulations so you can avoid caps, or bring in different regulations to do this. I mean, if you set a total of, say, I'm not making the number up, I'm just making the number up, 5 per house maximum for rental. Okay, that might limit overall the impacts within your community. The need to limit the number of units that might be here. You're not going to see the 12 and 15s that people are trying to push for. And that might alleviate a little bit of the pressure to do things like caps, or minimum stays, or maximum stays, those kind of things. there's a balance that can be struck by how you structure the policies.
Because I guess the cap situation to me doesn't necessarily take care of the problem. It limits the number of short-term rentals, but if you live in a subdivision that's unless you have a lot more rentals than people, you're not really addressing the problem. It's still a lot of rentals, and it's gonna be a long time before that subdivision realizes less rentals, perhaps. Maybe we can regulate the number of people in these rentals.
I think for me, you put, we had meetings, several just in a row of Lakeshore Loop coming in and bringing it to our attention. And they're pretty close to 50%. I can't imagine every neighborhood being that way and having every other house. I liked living here better before, right? Before STRs. But I also believe in short-term rentals. Like, I believe that we should have them. But I do believe in balance. And I think for me, I believe in caps because I believe it helps compliance. I also believe it keeps the neighborhood character. And that's why I moved here. I moved out of Breckenridge and came and lived because I wanted neighbors, I wanted some space, and it worked for me and my family. So, and it's hard to, I don't even know what it could look like, but, I don't want to be Lakeshore Loop. I don't want, I think for them that's gone too far, and that's where that could happen in any neighborhood, but there are neighborhoods that are a little bit more desirable than others for STRs. And without caps, it's going to be turned into, even if I just don't know if software could actually limit the number, right? And we can't even limit right now, and that goes back to compliance. I never, not talking about it, but if we can't do the compliance on how many people are in a house or the noise that they create, how are we actually going to find the compliance for how many rentals they have? I just think over all the different, and I don't know how the software works. If it could do that, that's great, but I still wouldn't want the revolving door at every house in each neighborhood.
But if it could do that or get close, and the penalty of violating is substantial.
Yeah.
Your license for 2 years, people will.
I think what to make a reminder of is that in this conversation, these are what do we want to look like before we know whether or not with 100% certainty the enforcement is viable and is with 100% certainty we can reach the thresholds. These are these discussions of what do we want this to look like. Realism obviously does play a role here, but the policy is generally focused on where do we want this to go. For example, you're saying the 5, 10 to 15 year, and what does this ideal look like? So just because I don't have the answers right now to provide you guys what with absolute certainty the town can and cannot do does not preclude you guys from having that conversation and going down that thought process.
So maybe that's where we should start, maximum minimums. But I still wouldn't want 50% of houses renting 200 nights a year or whatever the max is.
That number is I'm not worried about that. I don't take my.
No, I'm just saying, so if everyone in the neighborhood, let's take Lakeshore Loop, everyone's gonna have an SDR and you allow those houses to have 150 nights or 200, it's still an impact on the residents of that neighborhood.
And they're probably going to be at the high rental points, the Christmas week and March, and they're gonna concentrate probably. I'm not sure.
What's
My thought.
interesting about this conversation, I'll go back to what Ben said, is it used to be everybody rented in the wintertime, and these places sat vacant in the summer. Our community as a whole has changed a lot. We're starting to get a ton more people here in the summer when we're all outside enjoying our property on the deck, backyard, whatever. And so I think the impact is felt more now in the summer probably than even in the wintertime. even the snowbank's dead and sound and make it seem less obtrusive when people are around, right? So
It's important.
just on your numbers, Chad.
Yes.
How about of course, as far as the third page there, I think it's page number 4. It's the graph that has series 1 and series 2. It's what
Oh, yeah.
is that percentages? So like if we use Lakeshore Loop as an example, or Timber Creek Estates, is Lakeshore Loop right under 40%, like around 30 to 40?
Yeah, that's just over 30% there.
Okay, so it's not 50%.
I wanted to clean this chart up a little bit more before we got this in front of you guys, so it's a little messy. I'm trying to, yeah.
So
But-
what does the red line represent? That's the
That is
average.
the base median. If you looked at it as built lots, not entire all built plus vacant, drops it to 23-ish%. If you include mining claims, existing lots, there's certain structures that don't exist and cannot have the capacity to be built on. So this is the best proxy, is the existing built.
So that line represents about 23%.
This line is 26 with built.
It seems like most properties fall
It's pretty close. Yes, there's the Macer Minor being that obviously
Sure,
outlier
right.
of 2 properties and 2 short-term rentals. And once again, another reason why neighborhood-specific caps is a very tricky issue in
Right.
town limits, because of the number of the neighborhoods and then relative to the number of houses and built lots in the community.
I'd be more in favor of discussing if we're gonna do percentage caps, if this is go to the zones, than by subdivision. As a general statement.
You could do an overall percentage of the town,
But that doesn't really
those all, and plus 50% of each neighborhood.
That-
And or whatever one's less, or, yeah. 50% of each neighborhood, or 30% total of the town.
What's nice about this, while we're generating this, it doesn't have to be black and white, one option or the other option. There is the option here where we can layer things. So it doesn't have to be, we choose this and we have to stick to it, and there's no other metric that is used to functionally observe STR percentages.
So one of the things that would be helpful, and maybe your graph shows, I just can't see it, is the number of homes that we have, properties. It's how many short-term licenses percentage-wise are out there. You said 25%, is that what you thought?
Yes, it's 26%. I would need to make it quicker because we have, off the top of my head, 206 licensed short-term rentals in the community at the current moment. It was about 225 last year. The requirements from the 2025-09 ordinance reflected a change. But this, I know that there's a smidge over 950 total lots in town limits. However, I couldn't quote you the exact number of built. It's somewhere in the upper, like 7 or low 8. Yeah.
Being built out, right?
What's that?
It's like there's only 47 vacant lots or something.
No, there's
They're
about
that-
30 or something.
Yeah. I think that might go down to like the viability of constructible lots versus the lots that exist that are vacant, because many of them are just just structurally.
Mining claims
Yes,
or
exactly.
something.
Yeah. There's a category called meets and bounds that is about 25 lots, and it's just not.
So it's 21 or.
Yeah, it's not. There are no short-term rentals within meets and bounds.
So if you were to take that 950 total lots, and there's really 25 that are buildable, we've got about 925 buildable realistically.
I would need to dive in to see how many currently exist. The number is, it's less if you can. I think that the number existed as the number of vacant but buildable lots, and there are a wider number out there than we initially anticipated of lots that are both vacant and unbuildable.
Like that one on the side of Highway 9, where they
Yeah.
are putting a buildable, trying to build a house, it's not a buildable lot. Let's even build that.
They're getting it, huh?
So Chad, it would help, how far back do we do statistics on number of short-term licenses in that year? Just do we go back 10 years, do we go back 5 years, 6 years?
We have
So 2013?
Yeah, we have close to a decade of data. I would have to dig through the files because one of the downsides to our software is it doesn't capture good snapshots of previous years' detailed data. So it makes it hard to plan this trajectory out.
Even 5 years back, 6 years back is hard.
I would have to rely on existing Excel data that the town has in its files. I may be able to find that.
We just ballpark it.
I can ballpark that.
Just
Yeah.
to get an idea, like how much has short-term rentals grown?
Mhm.
If they haven't grown a lot, then based on your chart here, it looks like somewhere around saturation is somewhere around 25, 26, 27% as your overall community based on the median line, right? I mean, I don't know if I'm thinking about this correctly. As far as if people want to go down that cap, let's just say a hybrid, where you have as a community, we're going to limit X, like a whole community total of 30% or 25 or something like that. And then per zone or subdivision, you have another percentage. That's what I mean by hybrid. I'm just trying to get to some path here to where we can start making some decisions.
Would those licenses have terms?
What do you mean?
So could you own a license for ever?
I don't think, I like the having to, the thing about the every year applying to me.
Well, I don't mean every year, but I mean just, would an SDR have a term? So let's say
Like I only get it for 10 years, then
I could get it for 3 or 5 or whatever it is, right? If we're gonna limit availability.
I don't think that's how I'd like to approach it, Ben. I think that if you've got people that are really good neighbors and they're doing a good job, I think they deserve to keep the license. That's the neighbor you want as far as in your community.
For sure.
It's I look at this.
What about the neighbor
program,
who needs that income to move into that?
And again, I don't think
can't
it's
get that.
I don't think it's a matter of from my perspective. I'm looking at these, most of them are second homes, and if there's short-term renting, it is a second home. It's justifying the purchase. They don't need the income, they want the income to help justify the purchase. In other words, for example, a lot of these people have to get loans to get these. They can't qualify to get that loan, and the rental income doesn't help them qualify for the loan. It does in a long-term rental, but not a short-term rental. So all I'm saying is they don't need the money. It helps them justify the purchase.
So this gets back to you're in or you're out, right? Just because they don't need it, if they want to realize that gain, and you say, well, no, this person already has that license. And just because they want to realize it, whether person A or person B needs it is immaterial in my opinion. If they want to realize that gain, and you say, no, you can't, because this person is realizing that gain.
I see your point. I guess to get on one side or the other, I would not be in favor of that. I'd rather reward the people who are good, who are doing the right thing with their rental, being good neighbors, and allow them to continue. And not just say you get it for 3 years and then you're done, and then the next 3 year go around, you can reapply. I would
No, I
based on the short.
I'm not saying I like either one of them, but in my mind that there is a certain point where you're stuck. Right? If you want to get into this community, and whether you can do it outright with cash or not,
Well, that's assuming, Ben, that people hold on to the property forever. I mean, the average is somewhere around 3 to 5 years that people hold on to a second home and then sell, and then it
good term for a license.
Excuse me. Oh well,
Good term for a license.
I don't know. I'd like to reward.
I'm messing with you a little
Yeah,
bit.
I know. I love. Keep it coming. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that.
I mean, I would be interested to find out what the software is, as far as maximum minimums go, and if that's even a possibility. I mean, I do believe that we have to have a minimum to avoid hoarding of licenses. And I believe there should be maximums, but I just don't know the reality of what's that?
Do we have you have to rent a minimum of 10
days. So we have a minimum now, but we don't have a maximum. But there's no minimum dollar amount either, right? Like if I rented it for $100 just to keep my license and paid whatever 3.4 on, on that $1,000, like how is that? Yeah. Anyway,
But when it can't transfer, it doesn't really benefit anybody.
Doesn't-
Just
right.
keep a license for no reason.
I thought that was the intent of the minimum number
I mean,
of
it's
nights.
the intent of, I think the hoarding is that I'm living here full time now, but someday I might only live here in the winter, I might only live here in the summer. So that's I think what the hoarding rule is for. So that you're not holding on to a license so somebody else actually can't have the benefit of short-term rental, their house. So I don't believe, I think there should be a minimum and a maximum, but I just don't know the reality of the maximum. I think there's a minimum, but again, it should, in my book, also be like almost a dollar amount. But then how do you say like your house is worth this much per night, and I don't know how.
Yeah, cause I run mine pretty low, cause I'm there, it's like, why not?
Sure, I mean,
So
there's.
I would say I'm more of the maximum scale of, I try to just do it, and if somebody's not in there, I'll go to the place for sure, just to get somebody, because it's free money for me, basically.
You have a very unique situation.
I know,
Because you're there, that would be.
He's literally, and I think Nick's is similar.
Yeah.
Right, Nick's is within sight of his.
You've got
front door.
you mean his garage?
His short term.
Oh, he owns a short term. Yeah, on the, no,
He has a license, but he is not required to have, under our ordinance, he has a room with a bathroom but no kitchen. So it doesn't qualify. That's
Yeah, because he share a kitchen in his house.
He
Yeah,
keeps
but
the
he's
license, he
still
gets a
compliant.
license, he takes out a license so he can advertise on the platform. Have a license. He's not in the program, he doesn't,
well, he almost has a second.
Oh,
So he's paying.
And John probably does. It's just unique when you have an ADU. Is that the right term for places that are accessory to your house?
Well,
That you,
so
yeah, it's like an ADU by definition. Where you just,
kitchen, that's the good.
most people,
Kitchen with the main.
I think we don't allow those so anymore. If you have one, you're grandfathered in, but most people don't have that situation where they can live there and short-term rent or long-term rent that other,
If you wanted to short-term rent a room in your house, you can do that.
Well, it's not.
But you can't build an ADU, you can't.
but
You know-
how many people?
So if you're just doing one room in your house, you don't have to pay any?
No, you
You
don't.
have one room in your house, we're not. There's a limit as to how many people can pop in that room. But you're not required, as long as there's not a kitchen or just one room, you don't have to do a license.
You have a kitchen, bath, pocket, so the whole thing, as long as they share.
We should make people.
Yeah, that's on,
That's a carve out for 2025-09.
that's on page 10 of this ordinance, and I have an asterisk there because I think that this bears discussion. I'm not sure that you should be able to rent out a room in your house without a license.
For sure.
Necessarily correct.
I would
Everyone
agree.
should be on the same, your short-term renting and.
Why are you rolling your eyes, Bob?
Everybody don't have a license.
But we go back as to why, largely, they didn't want to track individual single room rentals. It's just.
Isn't this how this whole thing started? The genesis of Airbnb was, I'll rent you a room in my house while you're on vacation, or it was a swap thing where you live in France. I mean, I just think that is it hard to track? Probably.
Yes.
If they have a license,
Probably.
Is it too early to see if we got a consensus on anything?
Well, if we're going, I'll chime in real quick just because you haven't heard me talk enough. If you go by the information Chad provided us, with the residential districts and their cap limits, all of the residential districts are capped at 10%. The only ones that are higher are mixed, high density ski resort, Frisco obviously being a total outlier, but I would consider Frisco probably more commercial than residential in general. Maybe there's a little bit of overall that you would call more residential, but there's so many condo units back there. I can't think of a part in Frisco I would say is their residential core. It's so spread out through that town. So the fact that theirs is 25% makes sense, but every other town took their residential and capped it at 10%. Just for a fun.
So what would help us, Chad, is if we knew the percentage of short-term rentals of the number of homes that are existing.
26.
We gotta
It's
go,
in here.
we gotta go on potential. I think we have to go on potential.
26%? We're-
overall.
So yeah, still,
We're at 26, this Frisco did a broad stroke, 25% take the total number of homes,
Yeah.
properties in Frisco.
Makes no difference where they are.
25% can be rented, once you hit that number, that threshold, no more short-term rentals,
If they've hit that count.
which doesn't surprise
I believe they did it at 23. So it's been a couple of years now.
Breckenridge
me.
is.
So where are we is my question, in terms of number of short-term rentals that we can document based on the number of.
It considered improved lots, depending on, if you're not making a distinction between.
Yeah, let's-
So it's
let's just use that.
26%.
We're at 26% now.
Yes.
So overall, we're at 26%. Of, okay. Frisco's at 25%.
Yes. They just decided to go one cap, so that's their criteria, and they run with it.
Going back to the original question, I think that somebody, Jody, brought up, I would not be in favor of, I mean, if someone had a short-term license or is in the process of applying, I think they should be allowed to have that short-term license, even if we're over 12. If we determine that we're gonna set a cap community-wide, I would like to see a hybrid, honestly, because a lot of the reason we're having the discussion is the feeling of community. And doing the whole community doesn't take care of the problem for certain neighborhoods. So I think we need to do some zones and have specific percentages within those neighborhoods too. To be fair, as to why are we doing this to begin with?
And if that were to be a consensus, for example, you instruct Chad and I to sit down and work out some zones.
But I'm throwing out because I'm trying to.
I'd like to see that. Zones, would you be interested in seeing that?
What would the criteria of those be?
You know, I would propose that we look at trying to equalize the number of units within the zone and the number of STRs. So everybody's comparable. And the boundaries, we don't draw the boundaries based upon this criteria.
I think something to be thought about in that context of the little maps we see is if there is a zone or neighborhood that a lot directly abuts to a different zone neighborhood, someone with an STR in this zone that would affect the neighbor behind them is something that should be considered as effective.
There's some
Or
fuzzy,
affected, I guess.
I think there'll be fuzzy areas that we're not really get to. Unless you start doing space, you get to it by space. In other words, you could have a certain percentage within each zone, but no STR could be within a certain proximity to another. It gets complicated. So,
How do people feel about a hybrid type
So for
situation?
that, those
Hybrid.
Highway 9 residences, is that zone, is it different? To me, those properties are different. Because they don't access town road. They don't have any.
Yeah, the cleaner's not driving all the way down the road to get to the property. The hot tub guy's not driving all the way. He just pulls in off the highway and bam, he's there. He does his thing, gets back on the highway and leaves. I agree that they're different. I don't know how.
Because we have, there's what, 41, 42 intersections on that?
Yeah, I don't remember the number.
But I don't remember how many of them are roads, but there's
Chief, do you remember? You guys
close
counted
to
them.
100.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
100 individual intersections, including roads and some shared driveways.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, I suppose the question is, another question is, do we viably make the distinction that properties that are on Highway 9 would almost be considered a separate, almost quasi-commercial sort of zone that is independent of the others? And is that considered a fair metric?
And I would say that some of those for sure, in my opinion, especially like I said on the east side. Because they back up to nowhere. On the west side of Highway 9. I'm sorry, so I have this to back up. Exactly. The west side backs up to National Forest. The east side typically backs up to Blue River and the neighborhoods directly below. So those are a little bit different. Like those houses are still within that neighborhood where the stuff on the west side of the road really isn't. It's
So depend on that, some of those are narrow. The houses are close together, some are wide, and the houses are further apart. For me, the whole thing of community and disturbance is the noise. For me, I have to be next to a short-term rental, that's when I'm gonna feel the most impact. Not the cleaner going down the road and.
Well, I think there's already a certain amount of noise you get from living on the highway. So I think
Yep.
your threshold is different in a highway scenario as opposed to your house. I mean, I can hear the highway from my house too, but not near as much as John can. And if John had a dog and he ran out of his driveway, he's on Highway 9. He runs out of my driveway, he's on Mountain View. I think those houses are different to me, and I don't say that because of John's house. And just as I drove here today, I looked at all of them anyway. They're just different. They don't, like I said, their impact on the community seems less to me.
So, back to so we're talking about zones and capping, right? Or percentages within those zones. People seem to be open to the idea of zones. And percentages, and
I think if you came up with zones, you could also do a scenario of different size caps, right? What does 10% look like? What does 20% look like? What does 30% look like? I personally don't think we should go over 30%. I think
That's 3 houses out of every 10. That's,
Yeah.
to me, a lot.
that's
What
things
if
like
it's
a lot. You know what I mean? But like, maybe if I don't know how much, if that's like, Jody, that's too much work and that's not realistic. Like, I don't know the realism of that, but it would be good to see the different scenarios, I guess. But at the same time, you could have a town cap and a zone,
I think 30% by zone is a lot more viable than a 30% by subdivision.
for sure.
Yeah,
I think
because that becomes far more complex.
if you were to use Timber Creek Estates, Lake Shore, maybe the Crown,
Yeah.
as beta areas in terms of they're fairly dense and they're one subdivision. How does it look at 10%? Where are they now? What does it 20% look like?
Those are the top three, Timber Creek, Sherwood, and Crown.
And the Mountain View's not.
And then I for me, I put Blue River Estates, even though there's both in a zone, because there's a lot of houses in there. In that zone, in that
Blue
area.
Ridge Road, you're saying.
I call it Blue River Estates, but it's
I used to say that.
It did. Leisure living.
so it's
homestead.
Mountain View, it's Wilderness.
Wilderness,
It's-
Sherwood.
Yeah,
The
well,
96.
the 96 and the Coronet,
Yeah.
they're all in that area, and it just as far as seeing what some of these, not necessarily the whole area yet, but maybe take a couple of these, maybe even it's Lake Shore and Timber Creek Estates, and see how it would look with these different, because if we laid out zones, I think those in themselves would be a zone almost.
One access, main access up the highway for the river estates. Is that kind of why you're thinking that's a zone?
I'm thinking just density is, certainly that's an argument, but just look at the number of homes in that little area.
Yeah, I was gonna say, functionally, how many zones are we looking at until it becomes closer to neighborhood specific? Yeah,
So
so
mine's 6.
because Spruce Valley Ranch will never mind, they don't have short-term rentals, it's something that moves.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's half the town.
Yeah. It's far the most as far as town and number of STRs right now.
Okay,
If you start adding those up, like we surpassed everybody.
okay, quick, so then we take it and cut it in half or do something like that, but just as far as getting going on something that has a lot of rentals based on the area. And a couple of these are specific subdivisions like Lake Shore, like Timber Creek Estates, like the Crown. Maybe don't do Blue River Estates right now, but just to look at it and say, okay, they're dense. And what would 20% look like? Where are they now? What would 10% look like? And
I think that logistically, I would recommend from an administrative standpoint to not divide zones too deeply, or else if we get down to, let's say, 20 or 30 STRs per zone, that'll become quite a quagmire to administratively handle that responsibility. So if zones are to exist, it should responsibly be a smaller rather than larger number.
well, Breckenridge is easy
Sure, that's a little.
because you got a historic district, you've got a residential area, and you've got all the condos.
Exactly. Yeah. Ours is a
It's not
lot more
that simple.
convoluted, yes.
Because that's why I was suggesting maybe a few more zones than just 3.
Yeah.
It's how you divide that up.
Sure.
And the goal, again, is to not have everybody have a fair amount of exposure to these short-term rentals or less exposure.
So in that same, if you do a zone and you come up with a cap, it's on here, number 4, grandfathering. Is it grandfather or is it a lottery? Or how does that work? You know what I mean? I know, so like Breckenridge and Silverthorne, they did, capped it at 10%. Then they said, here's the wait list. Their zone, whatever, I can't think of it, is a 20-year waiting list. They have other zones that have no waiting list. They have, so you know what I mean? So that's also, do you grandfather the people who have, and then just through time, it goes down to that cap? Or, because a lottery is pretty rough too.
Just because by sale, when the amount of people that will sell in a given amount of time will help with that.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's the natural.
Attrition, is that?
Thank you, yeah.
The non-transferable licenses, the provision certainly helps that dynamic, because if someone has had a short-term rental, they've had it for a while, they're most likely, once we get these things sorted out, more responsible than less responsible owners. They have more proper management versus improper management. So if we're advocating for proper stewardship of short-term rentals, that is something that can be used as a tool to incentivize high quality management.
And I certainly wouldn't want to be involved in a situation where you set a cap and there's already too many, and we have to do a lottery to pick you out.
Yeah,
And say,
no, I'm
"Hey,
not.
you
I
lose."
mentioned it, but I didn't mean it. Like, I know. Yeah. It's just the grandfathering of licensing.
Then everybody goes into the pot, and then we just.
So let's can we agree to give Chad some direction? Kind of come up with.
Talking about loans.
I think
Well,
it's that work like zones
zone.
and what it looks like in the different percentages.
There's the broad stroke cap for the whole community. That's one idea, like Crisco's doing. There's creating a zone or doing
I
something
don't
like
think we really have any support for
that. Okay.
For a broad.
So then we're back. So we're zones, capping within, coming up with some realistic zones, capping,
Yeah.
finding a realistic percentage.
Yeah, and if Chad is to do that. If Chad,
Chad, we have another meeting.
if Chad is to
Yeah.
do that,
I'll put you guys right after P&Z. You got a nice 8 p.m. start time.
I think it might be wise to either one of two things. What he's going to bring back, he is going to bring back to you will be rough zones.
Yeah.
And you'll have to massage them based upon some of your knowledge about what individual subdivisions are. Because he hasn't been here that long. I certainly don't know the neighborhoods as well as you all do. So there's going to have to be some massage.
I'd be happy to participate.
Okay. Or you put the a little subcommittee together where he works with you, the whole of you, and you all help him devise the zones that make sense. And then you present that back to the body. Either one.
I kind of agree, like 6 to 8 zones maybe, so we're not making a ton of them, we're keeping it smaller and more. Like, does anybody else have any thought on?
I know we sell things sort of rough. It's hard to imagine. I think I hate to do that to you, Chad, but
No, it's
if
fine.
you show us 6 and we go, yeah, we need 5 more.
Chad,
Or if you
I
show
will
us
make
6 and
the-
we need 2 left.
I will make the note that in most communities, if they have these zones, if you factor in the number of housing units per zone, I'd imagine they'd probably be in excess of 500 per zone if you went 1, 2 to 3 to 4 in Breckenridge, for example. If we break it up here, that would quantitatively go down to 125 to 150 units per zone. So there is a different dynamic at play if we subdivide it down to that level, versus having a wider scope.
I hate putting more on my plate, honestly, but I'm happy to take a stab at it.
Yeah, I'm happy to come.
That's right.
There you go. We're leaving this all over.
Here's what you do. You set up a time to do this that you all can meet. And he can post it as a public meeting. Come in here, and it's okay if he has more than 3 more. If it's a public meeting, I advise that you do the planning of it by yourselves and not involve the public. And just
Absolutely.
Much as I love the-
I'm saying outside of this, do something, present it to Chad as an idea to present to the group, just to take a stab at it, not necessarily.
I would think you need to be involved to give you an idea of where these what we call measle dots. You should put a dot on every lot that has an STR license. And that would give you an idea of how to scope these things out. Because if you come into zones, you go, oh, I didn't know there was that many in that zone.
I did make a pretty archaic map. These are individually broken out by neighborhood. It does not particularly help when you want to look at the town-wide picture, because I would have to make another map for that. But
I love that.
okay, good.
If we're
Sorry,
talking
Sam.
about construction and
You're.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, make your map again.
Chad, we could get that big mass out, for example.
Yeah.
And we could literally put dots on all the lots that have STR. We could use blue
Yeah.
tape to maybe just because it peels off,
Yeah.
say this could be a zone, that could be a zone, and just see how it looks and do this before the meeting. So then when we come to the meeting,
Yeah.
or you present it, because I'm happy to help you outside of the meeting, because I know you don't know the community, and I'm not saying I know it better than Ted or anybody, but I've got a pretty long history here, and I might be able to help,
Yeah.
and I'm willing to help and to move this along because we've got to. I'm anxious to get get this sorted and then get on to enforcement.
Yeah.
And
How long do you think it would take a subcommittee or even a lot of you to sit down and work on zones? How much?
I could take us,
10 minutes.
I don't think it could take long.
if, I think if Chad could get that map. And, or a map that you can, it's down laser graphics, if you want to get another one, and put the dots on there, that'd be the first, I don't need to be part of that.
Wonder if I can repurpose your old map. I'll see about it.
Just go buy a new one or something, and just stick those, by the way, I have a bunch of those colored dots, if you want them.
Yeah.
Are you looking
Because you
for
can't just buy 10 of them.
sooner than later on this, like?
Yeah, like tomorrow morning, not just kidding.
No,
But sooner, this week, we gotta, this is a big step.
It
Get
is.
the zones we can start looking at right now.
So Chad, if you could get that map, I'll get you some colored dots, and you could do that part, and then when you get that done, and you have a little time, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
And other people too, if they want.
It shouldn't take long to do that at all. Now that because I have the data here, it just needs to get spread out. Thank you.
And then let's get a map.
Yeah.
Put some, and maybe we get different color tape, like some different proposed zones with colored. I'm very visual.
Yeah.
It helps me with
I
making decisions.
see zones already looking over there like you were at that map.
So you wanna, I'll be happy to do it this week if you can get it.
And then we'll set the map on a big table,
long as it's
not the floor.
Yeah. Tomorrow might be a little hasty, but we'll get. We can do this soon.
Just would you just reach out and say I've got the dots, tell me some times, and let's get together?
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable?
To me, it does.
So do you want to still talk about this, push this to the next session?
Do we want this to be a subcommittee of a certain number of people, or just have this open to as many board members as can attend at a given time?
I'd rather it come like just a couple of us to a meeting, and maybe if anything, get it together so we can bring it to another meeting like this. It'd be nice if we could have it for this when we don't. And then as a group, we can look at it. The subcommittee thing seems like it takes too much time.
Well, it's
Organized.
3 people.
You tell me how many. It'd be, there's no restriction on you doing it all together in a room as long as it's close to public meeting. But it may get more clumsy because it may take more time
To do it
as a group, as a big group.
as a big group.
Well, I think if certain people want to, then, like you said, we can massage it later as, right, so.
It's not a matter of wanting to do it. I just will volunteer just to get this moving.
All right, Barry, I like it.
And if anybody wants to join in, I think we'll just do this like this little informal
Yeah, I agree.
committee. We don't need a formal thing, I don't think. Just if you'll just get that part done, Chad, just let Chad know if you want to participate in that part of it, and then I think we're getting some consensus here. I feel it. At least we're talking about zones. We're talking about percentages. We're getting somewhere, right?
No, I looked at the right.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I was looking at the lighting, it's pretty well. But yeah, I agree, yes,
So the zone development is probably the most complicated of all these things that you'll
It
work
is.
on, okay? And to go back to the comment about scientific evidence, numbers are great. I'm not saying never use numbers, okay? Numbers are really helpful in whatever you do, right? As government, but we don't have to submit it to a scientific program to figure out whether the numbers make sense.
Just as a consensus, it might help. What do people think is, if we go percentages and zones? What is realistic? 10, 15, 20 as a starting point?
We're at 26. I don't know. We want to be
Per
We want to be
25?
below, at or below that.
Everybody should have an opinion.
If you
So instead of go around 25%?
if you set it a little higher, where there's not, the cap doesn't limit, it just has a little buffer in there. You allow a couple people to come and apply. And you can do it by lottery, you can do it by just first in submits. If you do it too low, if you do it lower than what you have, the question is how long will it take you to get to the cap over time? If you do 10%, it could take you 40 years.
What I'm looking at right now, Bob, is how many short-term rentals are in a given area now? And trying to establish zones, like what's reasonable within.
So
those.
what is that zone percentage after you come up with the map?
Yes.
I get it, I hear you. Yeah.
To say, okay, our thought process was we didn't want to give any zone more than 25%. Does that make sense? And do it, and then the group can say, well, we think that's too small, or too big, or something like, or 15 or 20. I don't know. It'd be good to have a little bit of. Seems like people, from what I'm hearing, they're somewhere around. Well, I've heard anywhere from 10 to 25%. If it was our subdivision, Jody.
I mean, I think for the whole town, I wouldn't go over 25. Because that's for the whole, right?
Right, but if it
But
was just our
then
subdivision.
then you have to do zone, because then you need that,
25 zone.
right, so I guess I'd go 25.
So why don't we just, Chad and I think about 25% per zone.
I'm always gonna leave them low, just so you know.
Me too.
And
Like,
That's
I'm
okay.
gonna lean higher so we don't deal with the hassle.
That's my
20
water.
is 1 in 5. I like the sound of 1 in 5 better than 1 in 4.
sure, I mean, not just,
Yeah. And
20
20% is, to my mind, reasonable.
If the number is comparable to what you have, what you're saying is what you have is okay. You'll get some attrition over time.
Okay.
But you'll still issue new licenses up to that higher level, right? 30, let's say it's 25. And you go below 25, you'll issue some license back to 25. If you're over 25, some will die out and so 25 is what you're saying is our number, our happy place. If you're gonna do 25.
Okay,
If you
Chad,
wanna do 10,
I think that-
you want to have fewer. I want fewer, so that attrition will not be made up. And so the question is whether you're okay where you are.
if you do that, the dots, Chad, if you could maybe just take the number, well, you'll have it all set up. What's the percentage in someplace like Lake Shore and Silver Creek Estates now? Just to get an idea of.
I mean, my thought of the zones is not about the dots that are currently there. It's about use of resources, which seems to be the number one complaint about too many in the zone. But also, use of resources is the roads, the number of people on them, and looking at the grand map of the town. The way my brain works, certain parts of town are lumped together based on that, and how much resources are coming in and out of main arteries and to the highway. And look at that first, and then compare it to the dots then, and see how they mesh, and then we could adjust. You do that. But if it's a total resources conversation, which it seems mostly to be, then each part of town to have balance would have to be balanced in the zones. But that's definitely going to lead to dots being overwhelming in spots, and that's a conversation that will have to be had once we see where the dots are.
Would that help you, John, to see it? Okay.
I kind of see it already, but just looking at that. I'm good at that part of things.
10 minutes. You said 10 minutes. That's a big step. I gotta tell you, to get there. You may look at the map. You may say this is not going to work.
Right.
Right.
Just fine.
Move on.
so should we move to possibly just wait till we have the map, then we need to come up with another work session. And so we should probably look at that, and then maybe we could just adjourn this meeting for the day, because we're at that point where I think we made a little bit of headway.
Because you might say that with the caps and the way you structure them, the zones, everybody loves the zones. You don't need to go to minimums and maximums. You're gonna live with it for a while. Doesn't mean you can't come back later and do some.
No, we can't change it.
you can't always change it, right? You can actually dump the zones too. But if you set the cap, and then that is workable for you, you may not need to go to the other areas. So let's do the caps first, come back in the meeting, committee puts it together, where they are, and then noodle on the caps. And if you go forward with the caps, it may answer the other questions. And if it doesn't answer the question, you have time to talk to questions. But we're getting close to being able to start looking at the policy being converted to regulations.
So is it possible to do the map, and then as soon as the zone map is done, then, I don't know if you can do that meeting doodle, but it kind of helps to see where everyone's at, with a few days that work for you, and then you can try to schedule it that way.
Knowing the
I'd
map
like
is
to-
done.
No,
and
the
ready to
map is
go
done,
for
but if we
it.
schedule the meeting without a map, then that's
Sure.
useless.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is.
So Chad, I'd love to get this done this week and have a special meeting next week. For me, but
We'd have to have another off day like this because planning and zoning exists next Tuesday. So that would be, but it's not an impossibility. It's just we'd have to logistically figure out when that time sits.
So you'll let us know when the map's done, then we'll move forward with the session. Is that good? Okay.
So yeah, to clarify, is this map based on the 25% reality of, or okay? Because
Well,
there's a couple different
So we have
scenarios
to
here that
see
exist.
both and then.
Sure, because there's scenarios floating out here versus
Get the
which one to
dust on the
choose.
big map. the
yes,
big map.
exactly. Once we get the dust of the big map, we can discuss these specifics. Yeah, good. Okay, I can do that.
And then that would, you lead into the zones, that'll lead into the question, what do we do about issue new, versus old, grandfather, those things will come out of the zone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll push maximum and minimum duration of days to the next meeting, or do you guys want to talk about that here? Or you want to adjourn the meeting?
on what was
The last thing on here is maximum and minimums on duration of days of a rental stay, but
It's not a 3-day stay.
Yeah,
You're saying.
Once
Program.
we come up with that percentage, it's easy, right? That percentage, I won't speak for Ted, but I'll speak for myself. If that percentage is a lot higher, I'm gonna push for a lot lower than our maximum.
I got it.
When do you think we might be able to talk about enforcement? Maybe the next meeting?
Yeah, and after if you bite on the zones, you like the zones, and we dispense with other issues, if you don't need to go there, you should do the enforcement next. You should, all the things.
Chief, sorry to waste your time tonight.
No.
Don't mind coming to that.
Nothing else to do.
We're good.
I was hoping to be you for the enforcement.
Yeah, I'll be back. And you guys need my input on that. So it's fine.
And if I could just segue towards the enforcement, think a little bit as we get closer to that about how aggressive you want to be about enforcement. Our current regulations say that you get 3 strikes before we slap your hand and stuff like that. Is that okay? Do you want to be soft? Do you want to be tougher? I'm not saying answer tonight. I'm just saying think about how tough you want to be, because we had one license we revoked. Remember that?
Yeah.
It was a tough hearing, right? I'm going to be proposing to you a different method for enforcement.
Would anyone like to know how many times I picked up her trash?
But I think that you need to come to that enforcement with an idea, thought through about, I'm ready to revoke licenses. And if so, at what level of violation? Because I'm going to give you a program, I already been through it. I'm going to give you a program, I think that'll work, but you're going to have to noodle on whether or not Bob's being too tough. Okay?
Based on looking at the same process.
Put it at the toughest and we can work it to something from.
So I just want to make sure that.
And what you do is you penalize, you suspend, and you revoke. Those are kind of the steps that we take. So with revocation, we've never suspended a license. But I'm going to propose that we probably look at that more frequently. And I'm also going to propose that we use a page book out of the liquor licensing approach. We don't liquor licensing here, but in liquor licensing, you're allowed to suspend the license of a liquor store for violation and let them continue to operate under suspension under a penalty application. This might work really well for short-term rentals, because here's what you're going to hear. You suspended me, and I have all these rentals set up. Okay, if that's the case, you can keep renting, and under that suspension, you're going to be paying us a percentage of what you make, and that's the penalty. Okay.
We're worried about their profit.
Take
That's-
care of your renters, but you're gonna be suffering on the penalty side.
And
That's, I'm gonna
is
propose that.
there a way to make it less admin heavy?
Yes,
okay.
it's part of the program.
Yes.
Absolutely. No, we're talking about-
Okay.
He loves the.
Well, the problem right now is so admin heavy, and
Yeah.
then that would mean we need more employees. At the end of the day, just the short-term rental program isn't working with the amount of staff we have.
The multiple track system that could be theoretically used right now is not very conducive to being able to provide adequate code enforcement.
Off topic a little bit, but on topic a little bit, because we're talking about staff and how hemmed up are you with core requests? Like Larry said, he's gonna put 3 in on you. I mean,
Depends on the given week. It can be pretty substantial. It's become a much wider scope of town operations, especially with smaller towns in given years. There are possibilities that the town can receive wide enough requests that it shuts down town for a week.
All of our clients have had significant increases in core requests in the last 4 or 5 years.
Which delays our work
It's been-
sessions.
It's been this attitude that we're gonna burden government by asking for a lot of stuff. It's a huge
That's
request.
a terrible impediment in this situation where we have 2 guys.
And the law does not allow you to modify the response time based upon the fact that you have to.
Right, it's 10 days, right?
Well, unfortunately, too.
3
because
days, 10.
Right.
But 10 is the max, right? So meeting that deadline for some people, when you have 3 requests that are heavy and they want documents for 5 years, it basically eats up all their time. They get nothing else done. And that's why more and more communities, especially our clients, are going to actually, they're hiring people to do nothing but respond to core requests. Staffing.
Can you
Well, with our
withdraw
current staffing, it
before-
just means anything we need to get done is not gonna get done, and then we could make it so that December, we don't have anything done, because you're stuck doing
Yeah.
this. And it is what it is, I mean, we have to do the quarter
No, I
request, but at the end of the day,
Can
the
an
rest of the
individual
admin,
who
we're not.
submits a core request withdraw that?
Can they withdraw?
Yes,
They can,
they can, and then that lifts the burden.
but they
But
can't. But they-
Fine,
but the
Brandon,
question-
it's-
We always try to ask them to narrow the request down to make it easier. Rarely do they do that because they want to penalize the government. It's my experience. They want you to be burdened because they're not
They're
happy.
pissed.
And rarely is it ever one document. It's
And
always.
do we want to set another one of these meetings?
As soon as the map's done, then we can set another meeting.
Oh, we don't want to set it now and have the map done between now and then?
He has time to create the map we need, and then he's gonna send out a poll, I think is what we're gonna have done.
I'm available.
A poll to say when,
Yeah,
once it's complete, to say who wants to set the meeting what day.
Then can I make a motion to adjourn?
I'll say a second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.